Welcome to the Christopher Peter Review, an economic perspective on salient current events. In this episode, we are going to discuss recent current events, including the latest in Philly sports, artificial intelligence, and the big issues in our politics and government. Like redistricting, primary results, and an autopsy that was not helpful. Let us begin this special episode.
Welcome. Who writes your story? The honest answer is that we each write our own story. With every action we take, decision we make, and attitude we demonstrate, we tell the world our story. The issue comes when the story we tell is different from the one we want the world to experience. Now, it is common now to see celebrities post on social media that they control their own story and narrative. Usually because they did something completely out of the acceptable norm, and that is how they are processing their self-guilt by projecting externally on people that have the right to shape their own opinions, right or wrong. People will always hold themselves in a higher regard than they do others and justify missteps while they demonize others. So the obsession over who controls the narratives is really just a slanted argument covering the fact that we generally provide the pillars of arguments for our interests or towards our detriment. For high-profile people, there are journalists, also known as professional storytellers, who may shape coverage around them in the manner that best leads to clicks, views, likes, and subscribes to advance their own careers without much regard for the subject. And they may not always let facts tell the true story. But even in those situations, the decisions by the celebrity, athlete, or other form of public figure is really the deciding factor whether the story exists for a journalist to write it, or if they continue searching for another person to exploit. Many times that person and their public relations team is the side that determines whether the truth is released or if the writers get to fill in the blanks. So if you are worried about what your story is, how audiences you need are interpreting it, then evaluate what you are putting out there. Is your actions, decisions, and attitudes reflective of the plot that you want to pursue? Or do you need a redemption chapter to give the audience an alternate storyline to shift the discussion? But make sure it is consistent. So write your story. Do it carefully and strategically. And keep in mind, people generally like an elevator pitch rather than a memoir at any given moment. Your story should be a good, honest, and helpful one told over time as the audience interest grows. Not something bombarded on someone simply for saying hello. Is artificial intelligence the job killer that many expect? Lately, there is a feeling that we cannot go a day without reading about a major company determining that their future is best served by turning away from their current pool of employees and giving artificial intelligence a try to replace them. Many big, easily recognizable brands made public proclamations of job cuts in favor of technology. But, per some reporting, the strategic move has not yielded benefits and some are reversing course. We are already seeing artificial technology replace humans in terms of call center work, where many times you call a customer service number, you will be guided by an agentic artificial intelligence program assisting with resolving your problem, leaving humans to deal with the problems that do not easily follow prompts. This can be helpful to reduce wait times, but can be frustrating for non-standard calls, where you may have multiple issues that need resolution, depending on how the communication between the rep and you goes. There have been some companies that have reversed course or halted plans to completely reduce staff in favor of artificial intelligence. A reported 5.3% of companies are rehiring employers, per an article on Yahoo referencing a Vizier and MIT study. A small percentage, but one that may grow as some companies may find that they laid off the wrong workers. It does not help when you have corporate leadership speak about replacing what they deem low-value human capital with artificial intelligence. Sometimes they need to be able to speak more responsibly about the people that contribute to their bottom line regardless of what their compensation is. Sometimes, the people that management consider insignificant can be critical to their customer experience. Naturally, I would expect there to be some level of need to reverse course. Just like any cost-cutting endeavor, there may be some errors, as the people making the decisions are not always the most aware of the intricacies of who is doing exactly what. So, there may be the need to rehire laid-off staff. Not the end of the world. It happens. The concern may be whether there is a disconnect between the expectations of executive leadership and the day-to-day realities of lower levels of leadership, where someone wants to show they are embracing change and the people that actually make the company work are not able to implement the change in the time frame management is pushing. Having deadlines can be very useful in ensuring that teams stay focused on every aspect of a project and not fall into the complacency trap. But the need to fulfill a public statement rather than a realistic target can create unnecessary chaos and oversights. There is a risk that people may cut corners to simply meet the deadline, provide a deliverable rather than the deliverable that was asked for. I have no doubt that artificial intelligence will be very important to the future of our economic activities and life as we know it. There are so many positives to be excited about as well as challenges to mitigate. There is a need to be cautiously aggressive in its implementation. So what do I think of the schedule for my Philadelphia Eagles? The Philadelphia Eagles have been a staple in the playoffs since Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts took the helm of the team. As one would expect, our schedule is not going to get easier after winning 3 division titles, 2 conference titles, and 1 Super Bowl. It has certainly been a great stretch for us. The competition in our own division is not getting easier. The New York Giants should be able to move forward as a stable threat for the division title. Under John Harbaugh, you could expect a similar style of play as we saw with the Baltimore Ravens. Physical and aggressive. But, I still believe we have a better roster overall. While we split the season series last year, I think we will not overlook them again. The Cowboys should be better on defense and bring back their high-powered offense. They are definitely a threat for the title and will most likely be back in the playoffs this year either way. Of course, there is the issue of whether their star wideout George Pickens actually plays on the franchise tag or forces a trade, like Micah did last year, but only time will tell. The Commanders have rebuilt on defense after their bets on an aging roster did not pay off last season. They will have a new offensive coordinator and will have Jaden Daniels back healthy. At the very least, they should be more competent overall. If they can stay healthy, then they may become that team that made the run to the conference title game 2 seasons ago. The division is much better and we will have to play the Seahawks, Rams, Texans, Niners, Bears, and Jaguars, who all made the playoffs last year. The Niners who came into the link and escaped with a late victory. The Texans have the league's best defense and the Rams probably have the best overall roster. My Philadelphia 76ers will have a new person in charge of the team soon. The Daryl Morey experiment has come to an end, and the Sixers were no better off for it. Morey is a disciple in analytics but neither a championship nor a trip to the Eastern Conference Finals. It simply did not live up to the hype. Sometimes things do not work out as expected. I wish him all the best going forward. Right now, Bob Myers, who led the Golden State Warriors to 4 titles, is leading the search for a new leader. Some believe that he should be the person, but it seems like he may want to stay in the overall corporate role, or maybe he is the de facto leader of the overall operation, answering only to Josh Harris and Blitzer, who are probably more focused on the Washington Commanders. The Sixers have good young talent that need to be the focus of the team. But there are key veterans on big contracts that may not be ready to take a back seat or cede the leadership role. And maybe that is not a bad thing. Joel is still a great player when healthy, but is not healthy enough. As long as we are not completely reliant on his availability, we may be able to get along with having his contributions as an added bonus. Paul George is a skilled veteran and hopefully can play a full season next year and be a more consistent producer. I still think he has it in him and hopefully he finally has that full season to show Philly what he has left. And he probably wants to finally have a full slate to make up for the suspension last season. Great player, but that was a bad look. The Sixers will retain Nick Nurse for next season. Hopefully, he can push past the current ceiling of a fruitful showing in the second round. Since his coach Toronto Raptors ended our season on a buzzer beater that bounced around before sealing our fate. Every coach since then, including Nurse, has not really led the team to be able to make fans feel like we have a chance. But, Philly fans do not give up on our teams. They just need to be willing to show up and motivate them to push past our opponents. So there is an art to journalism. The market for sports reporting has been dominated by ESPN for decades and in many cases rightfully so. There is no real competitor that can offer the scale and quality that it offers. Despite the issues that fans, athletes, and people in that industry have with the worldwide leader of sports, they are good at what they do even if the product is not the indisputable best product on the market. As I have discussed before, a market does not necessarily need the best product in the world. The combination of convenience, accessibility, and ease of adoption can make a product or service highly sought after. A better product or service that is hard to find, not consistently available, or difficult during initial use may be something that people may avoid. The biggest risk or threat or external opportunity to the worldwide leader is the growth of alternative media, including podcasting, blogging, sports radio, and social media, especially from content sources led by athletes speaking about the sports they have significant experience in or can eloquently articulate the intricacies of the sport to the fans. Consumers of sports media are shifting away from sports journalism towards the athlete perspective because it is more entertaining and it cuts the middleman out. There is a major difference between hearing a person who is in that moment or similar environment than hearing a retelling of an event. This is not unique to sports journalism, as content from policymakers and political operatives are highly more informative than traditional news journalism. There are many great athlete-led content platforms that are popular, but it still is not an environment that anyone can just jump into and be successful in. People want perspective, not necessarily opinions. There is a blurred but important distinction between giving insight into a situation, what athletes think, how they train, how coaching matters, or what could go wrong, and using your experience as a bully pulpit. Some athletes are natural in this environment and speak to the infrastructure of their sport to project or forecast whether an athlete or team will likely succeed or fail based on what is commonly experienced. Some make it challenging by using their platform to air grievances or lean into personal dislikes of organizations, media colleagues, or rivals, or to relitigate events to make them appear greater when that is not the issue at hand. Some athletes are learning the hard way that using their media channels or platforms to emote following events may not be the best approach. When their expressions may feel right in the moment, there is a need to consider how the content is interpreted by the audience. The art in media is understanding how the consumer will interact with the product and the likeliness of accepting or rejecting. This is why news journalists release or hold certain stories, depending on how they want the audience to react. For instance, Jaylen Brown is a great player, but his comments following my Sixers upsetting his highly talented Celtics was not considerate of how the Boston fanbase may feel about losing a series that you needed a single win out of the last 3 games to move on. In many ways, he was right about how his season was a step forward, but it may have been better to do that the next day and instead acknowledge the fans. If done that way, there would have been predictably less backlash and no need for the back and forth with Stephen I. Smith. Some athletes on platforms they own are navigating the environment by making content aimed at creating takes that evoke emotions that they hope will generate views, likes, and subscribers. Some of these takes may not be consistent with the past content, but it does not matter, because the end goal is to connect with someone feeling strongly about the take that they want to hear. So is there a sustainable market for athlete-centered content and owned platforms in the market, or is it just a fad that will eventually return to the norm? ESPN and FS1 already showed that there is a potential future but investing in these shows to help bolster their lineups. They are adapting to not having creative control over content that will be broadcast over their network. They are accepting what the market is telling them, but I hope they do not overdo it by completely ridding their lineup of journalists that help shape the fan experience. In many ways, there is great value in hearing the journalistic perspective because good journalism includes insight beyond the event. Many athletes may not be able to speak to the ins and outs of the front office, other than what they felt happened, or what they felt was the reason. Journalists who are able and willing to confront the topic from all sides and present a comprehensive view of the greatest moments in sports can be very appealing and entertaining. There is an art to storytelling in sports that simply cannot be replaced. Some journalists are simply able to tell a story from multiple angles that an athlete may not think of pursuing.
Sports fans are cultured to experience the greatest moments in our sports history because many of the iconic moments were told to us by the great sports writers turned authors. Broadcasters who skillfully articulated moments that live on throughout the generations following the event. For Philly fans, the iconic home runs in our history are defined not just by the great performance by the athlete, but also by how icons like the late Harry Kalas or Merrill Reese called the moment. There is something in how the great sports writers tell stories of these events that make them larger than life. Sometimes athletes give us great insight into these moments and what they were feeling, thinking, and how well they were prepared. But the great sports writers can speak to the fan in us, in a way that some cannot. The challenge in this space is the debate between whether the sports writer has the proper insight or the credentials to speak on the athletes if they never were an active participant in that arena. So the athlete content creator will try to invalidate the sports writer to create space for themselves. They are not completely wrong or right. Too many times, journalists hide behind the fans and project them as the voice of the fans, when they really have nothing in common with the people reading their column. Some portray themselves as speaking for the fan, but the source would not lose readership or viewership from the next writer to do a column or segment. There are many athletes who simply are trying to relitigate their careers or aspects of their careers that they feel were portrayed unfairly by the media. An interesting approach would be if they had dialogue with the writer to discuss why it was written in that manner. Were there sources that influenced how the portrayal was made? Were there factors that the athlete is not willing to acknowledge that was a factor? Interesting to see that dialogue, if it is able to be cordial. There is an interest in the media market for the subjects to be the people discussing the topics. Every major show has a related podcast or after-show discussion with the actors and actresses. Politicians are getting into the podcast market, hosting or regularly contributing to shows to explain their views and approaches in office. So this is not surprising that the sports world would be the next to join the media frenzy.
Has President Trump amassed too much power, or is he simply doing what other presidents have done to shape their party's future by removing perceived internal agitators? The national political media all too often sensationalizes stories without even a shred of context simply because it involves President Donald Trump. Reporting always tries to shape the way the public views every action taken in a negative light or a questioning manner of whether it is beyond the powers of his office. Many times, there is a precedent shown that was purposefully ignored by writers who praised prior presidents for doing the exact same thing. There is a need for a level of consistency and at the very least an acknowledgement of the historical context of certain actions, even if you disagree with the policy that you intend to report on. President Trump is not the first president to support primary opponents of incumbent Congress leaders with the hopes of seeing a more friendlier figure amongst the pool of fellow party members. It actually is a smart strategic approach to trying to find team players to help advance their agenda. Politics is a team endeavor, where policymakers must balance independence with cooperation when it is needed. So, let us discuss the important current events in our governing and policy space in a comprehensive and objective manner that gives real perspective.
There is a clear shift of people preferring to live under the laws and economic conditions of red states over the blue states they may have grown up in. There is a clear red shift in the United States, as red states tend to be more affordable, friendlier to entrepreneurs, and more free than their blue counterparts. There really is no longer a justification to remain in blue state environments if you are not bound by employment, family obligations, or financial insecurity that prevents you from relocating. Blue states are not affordable, far from the ideal definition of safe, and hostile towards businesses of any size. Public resources are generally squandered and then residents get to pay more for less. As a result of the awakening, there is an obvious political consequence when you have people moving out of blue states combined with the removal of the population of illegal immigrants that previous administrations allowed to manipulate the census. This will reverse the allocation of congressional districts and federal dollars that were inappropriately allocated to blue states. During those years, Democrats went through great lengths to ensure that they maximized the map, creating the greatest number of Democrat-dominated districts possible. As one would expect, it put in place an environment where they were the default party. And you can see that with the registration data compared to elected officials. With the change of demographics and removal of those not legally here, there was a need to correct the bad public policies and align it back towards what actually exists. So what the media is calling gerrymandering and anti-democracy when Republicans do it, is simply restoring the original balance and removing the effects of illegal residents that should not have ever influenced any allocations. It was a risk for Republicans to make this effort, but it was the right approach when you look at the timeline of events. Redistricting was needed following the population shifts and removal of the illegal immigrants influencing the existing maps, which should have never been allowed.
There should have been more questions raised about why would any government not want to have data on the number of illegal immigrants in the United States. Why would any government not want to know how many people it allowed into our nation, especially if they are doing so with goodwill? They would want to be able to say that they protected this many people from persecution from their oppressive socialist governments. But policymakers did not want to do that because they wanted to remake our democracy in the middle of the night, placing people who were here illegally to influence the outcomes for countless American communities. Combined with the amount of money that has been diverted to their political campaigns and supporter base, there was a clear campaign to transform America by altering our democracy. Protecting our democracy has been a slogan for too long, and the media has raised alarm when Republicans do anything that is the obvious path, and are far quiet when blatant acts are being done by their preferred politicians. They did not even question who was running the country when it was clear we had a severely challenged person in power. Republicans redrawing maps to better reflect their state makeup with the removal of illegals is what all states should be doing. We do not want the puppet socialist-style fake democracy where elections are just a formality. That is what Democrats want to happen through the use of illegals, diverting taxpayer dollars to fund their campaigns, and corrupting social institutions like the media, public unions, and curated academic environments to give them an advantage. We have to be careful with the disinformation that progressive candidates are spewing. There is always a great level of projection and deflection. They want us to scrutinize others when it is their actions that are raising legitimate questions. Why are more people not pointing out that the party is quick to call Republicans fascists as running a Senate candidate with a fascist tattoo?
Politicians have to decide when to stick to principle, their constituents' interest, and their party leadership's demands. If the wrong decision is made, then voters will decide to align with the new candidate flush with party funds and the support apparatus to win and become the reliable vote the powers that be wanted. That is what happened with Thomas Massey, who stood against the Republican Party all too often and on issues that Republican voters felt were important. At times, his opposition seemed personal, not principled, and did not make strategic sense. And some of his stances were not well reasoned. So, there would be an appetite for change when there is an unreliable vote on important issues that voters heavily support. Now, there are some comparing what Trump and Republicans did to oppose Massey to what Democrats are doing to Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman. Except Fetterman has not really done anything egregious to his party other than speak with common sense. Fetterman has shown the ability to demonstrate reason and rationality for a senator doubted to have the ability to function.
Political independence is something refreshing at times, and it is generally far more accepted in the Republican Party than in the current version of the Democratic Party. Members of Congress are two elected officials representing populations of Americans who cast their ballots for that leader's approach, leadership, and policy ideas. But there are times when the needs of the broadest population of Americans can conflict with their supporter base. Sometimes, in the case of Massey, it seemed like it was personal, not political strategy. And the voters made it clear by a pretty significant margin that they wanted change from his brand of leadership. For many young Democrats out there, they may not recall that their party used to have a more intellectually diverse representation that tried to keep the party from the progressive hell they are currently in. But those blue dog Democrats were pushed out of the party in favor of more progressive sympathizers. They may need to recall how campaign dollars were withheld from elected officials who did not get along with the broader coalition of the party's objectives. Therefore, those who could not fundraise adequately, did not possess the political machines entrenching them, or have a stellar and popular record would fall to one the party preferred and secured loyalty through campaign funding. Politics is a team game, a common Democrat phrase, but it is really non-partisan. Both parties do the same. What is important is whether the differences in opinion align with the people or against the people of the districts that will be impacted. Sometimes outsider interests supporting the broader party objectives can ignore or suppress local needs and wants.
We will not have seen the last of redistricting or the removal of political candidates unable to go along with the broader coalition. There will always be population shifts that will require redrawing of our congressional maps. But the manner that it is done should be consistent with the laws in place and not simply a political reaction. All those complaining about the Virginia situation are purposefully being misleading and ignoring the facts, which the Supreme Court of Virginia did not ignore. Then to criticize the Supreme Court's decision to not intervene is completely and purposefully naive. Interesting to look at the misfilings and flubs during the process. We need to elevate our politics. And not give power to those that thirst it, but are not willing to earn it.
Now, let us discuss the headline issue, which is the autopsy report that is being widely attacked. Transparency in politics is a good thing and it can help a political party and their pool of candidates going forward, especially when the issues and problems the party faced were clear as day. Every political party goes through periods of ups and downs, times when they fail to connect with the public and times when there is close alignment. The important part is being able to be honest with the people who are staples of your base, not simply because it is the right thing to do, but because it confirms acknowledgement that you are on the same page, that the people leading the party, fielding and vetting candidates, and shaping the party's policy ideas are seeing what the base is asking for. The reasons why Vice President Kamala Harris did not win in November 2024 were pretty apparent. She did not do enough to establish herself as a candidate, what ideas that were unique to her, if any, and what she would have done differently than Joe Biden, not just President Donald Trump. She was dealt a tough task, but she did a lot to contribute to her own failure with a high price tag. The party took the easy way out. Joe Biden did stay in the race too long, but he was able to do so because Democrats were so willing to go along with the lie that he was a functioning president that was leading our nation, when he clearly was not. They peddle lies to the media, who rarely tried to confirm what many rational Americans already knew was the case. They went along with the lie, and then when it was clear as day to the American public on that dreadful early debate that they called for, everyone pretended to be shocked at what they saw. Now, they are going with the easy way out by blaming the person who is unaware that he is even being blamed. Yet, they still have him go around giving speeches. Joe Biden was a major problem as he was the president of record, an extremely poor record that was indefensible. But Harris still chose to defend that record and not show any gaps in opinion, despite it being clear and obvious that there were frictions there, and Biden may not have held her in high regards. They want to say that they did not go negative enough on Donald Trump, but the voters already knew all they needed to know about Trump. The media was more than happy to provide an open platform to anyone having negative statements about Trump. So it was not really an issue of being even more negative. They did not ignore the tea leaves and did not have a real plan when any rational person knew they were in a situation where a backup plan was extremely important.
For some reason, they seem to look fondly at the overall Biden era when most Americans agree it was a clear mistake. It is one thing to have to persevere through challenging times because there is a greater good taking place or that may occur. But, for almost every moment of Biden's time in office, there was no payoff. Just a great level of general incompetence, lack of clear leadership, and questionable policy approaches and no net benefit. Because they let the charade go on and progress through a presidential primary season where their people voted to continue with Biden, they created the 107-day problem that they experienced. Like most things, the problem did not just appear out of the blue. There was a trail of bad decisions that clearly created a moment where there were no real good options left. What Democrat supporters probably want to hear more than anything else is the reasoning behind why no one in the Democratic Party leadership was willing to be the voice of reason and say what every American knew deep down. Joe Biden should have kept his pledge to be a one-term president and the party should have at the very least allowed an open primary.
The only time when transparency can go completely wrong is when it is done in a manner where there is still doubt in the integrity of the people trying to be transparent, and that there is more being hidden from the public seeking answers. People would be more accepting if they see a full accounting, a difficult admission of fault, and a reasonable pledge to do better, but not when you are being supposedly transparent, yet still being dishonest. Joe Biden clearly created issues for the 2024 cycle. He did nothing but create issues for the most part, and he did that well before he was president. So it was nothing new that Biden created problems for the nation and Democrats. It is a bit weird for them to call for even more negativity in a political election cycle. Was it not that long ago that our former First Lady stated that when they go low, we go high? The pattern of dishonesty when they need to be transparent is a major problem. They simply cannot help lying to the American public. When Joe Biden completely flubbed that debate, as anyone with a half a brain expected would happen, they immediately had a credibility problem. Americans, including Democrats, realized what they expected was right. Joe Biden was incapacitated, and they were being lied to. They never addressed it, and trust was lost. They now want to blame an incapacitated person in his 80s fighting for his life. That is weak.
Kamala Harris is the frontrunner in the political polls for the Democrat nomination in 2028. And can we be sure that the people supporting her even truly know her? Despite having a short amount of time, she did have an opportunity to win, but she contributed greatly to the outcome. The decision to not show any difference in judgment between her and Biden was clearly not a wise one. Sure, there was probably a concern of being compassionate to her boss, but he was not really compassionate in throwing hot potato issues at her that she could not handle. And, if she had strong leadership, she could have balanced deference with showing materialistic difference. It is hard to throw every ounce of blame towards Biden when you did not distance yourself from the record and make it clear that you are a different candidate. For all intent and purpose, you accepted his record and decided to run on it, when you should have ditched it at the first chance you got. The party leadership chose to not have any form of primary and select the only obvious person who could access existing funds. There was a trust gap that was just getting wider. There should have been someone in the room to call for a turn away from the consultant vetting of everything and just focus on creating a distinct set of defining ideas. And let the chips fall where they may. The voters made the right decision with the choice set they were given. More of the Biden years, which everyone detested, or a return to Trump, which has been overall an improvement over those dreaded 4 years.
You have to be honest with yourself and accept the hard choices. And then you will see those hard choices become much easier. I think it was clear that the chosen path was to craft a report filled with findings that the authors found convenient to acknowledge. When the public really knows that there is more to the story. Set aside the report. To this day, Democrats are still showing the inability to acknowledge that the American public rejected their ideas and prefer to live in a fantasy land where their view that voters were not able to understand the issues. Never a great approach to blame the people that you need to select you. Americans do not want their economic outcomes ignored for fringe politics. They did not want their employer shut down for a politician to be obedient to special interests that are unable to defend their claims. They do not want our rights, freedoms, and interests set aside because it offends fringe politicians and their hope for power. Americans did not want to continue to see their communities decline and deteriorate while being asked for more. Only to see those funds go to those who did not contribute, are not legally entitled to it, and creating social harms. And Americans did not want to see the interests of criminals placed over taxpayers and workers. The reasons for the election loss was not just Joe Biden and insufficient negativity. It was dishonesty. It all comes down to dishonesty. Stacking lies on top of lies. Thank you for experiencing this episode of the Christopher Peter Review. Your viewership is appreciated and valued. Please follow the Christopher Peter Review on social media and continue to visit www.crcreview.com for new episodes. Thank you once again. Until next time.
Thank you for experiencing the Christopher Peter Review. Your source for an economic perspective that is completely objective.